The journal was shut, the lens tucked away, but neither Lyra nor Eli moved. They stood at the upper gallery window overlooking the garden causeway, both silent, both watching. Down below, the steward moved briskly, hood raised, steps clipped, hands hidden inside his sleeves. He wasn't heading toward the guest wing, or the kitchens, or any of the official outposts of the house. He exited through a side servant gate, unescorted. Lyra tilted her head. He's not going for tea. Eli's eyes narrowed behind her diagnostic lens. A shimmer crossed her vision, faint, but deliberate. There's cloaking magic on the message he's carrying, she muttered. Thin, compressed, not meant to hide from normal vision, meant to fool enchantments set to scan for threats. Lyra's hand slid to the inside of her coat. Couriered like that in the middle of the night? To someone she doesn't want the rest of us knowing about, Eli finished. They both watched as the steward rounded a corner and vanished into the lower district. Eli reached into her belt pouch and tapped a finger against a polished copper disc. A faint projection sprang to life. A tracking glyph. He's marked, she said. Lyra was already moving. We're following. They slipped through the manor like shadows. Lyra took the lead, fluid, silent, a part of the architecture itself. Eli moved just behind, a step removed from the physical world, her enchantments distorting sound and softening her footfalls. By the time they hit the rooftops, they were invisible to anyone not specifically looking for them. The steward moved fast, down back lanes, through merchant corridors, across old stone bridges that connected the upper district to the neutral zones of Concordia's core. But not once did he look over his shoulder. He thought he was unseen. Where's he headed? Lyra murmured. Eli pointed to a hazy quadrant on her tracking disc. Night Whisper's territory, deep interior. Lyra hissed between her teeth. She's selling secrets. Or trying to rewrite the story before Rose gets back. They watched from a roof ledge as the steward approached a black glass door. No guards, no markings. Just the telltale shimmer of deep warding. He paused, was scanned, then disappeared inside. Eli clicked the disc off. Lyra straightened. So now we know. She's scared, Eli said. She's cornered, Lyra corrected, and that makes her dangerous. A long silence passed between them. Concordia stretched below, calm on the surface but brimming beneath. Eli finally asked, Do we tell Rose? Not yet, Lyra said, her voice cold. Not until we know what she gave Lucien. Once we speak, we can't take it back. She glanced down again. And if Vess wants to use secrets to save herself, then maybe it's time we find a few of our own. Lucien remained by the glass wall long after the steward had gone. The envelope Vess had sent lay open on his desk. The ink was still drying on the final page, her latest attempt at rewriting history. He wasn't surprised. Vess had always been elegant, patient, and self-preserving. Her letter didn't beg, it didn't confess. It offered. A careful list of houses tied to the pre-Draven conspiracy. Names long thought neutral, some even exalted in the wake of Concordia's rebuilding. Lucien traced a finger along the wax seal. Desperate, he murmured, but not without precision. He turned to his aide, the same black-robed shadow who stood silently at the door. Send verification protocols on the names. I want confirmation within 48 hours. The aide bowed. What of the offer, sir? Lucien's lips curled into something resembling a smile. She wants protection, influence, a seat at the new table. Will you grant it? Lucien walked back to his desk and placed the letter beside another. Older, sealed with a fire-wrought crest, Rose's mark. She had once offered him something greater than secrets. Access. A future stake in the next generation of Concordian portals. Silent threading through realms, information gates, traffic hubs. A way to be everywhere without stepping foot outside the city. Lucien tapped the edge of Rose's letter once, then folded Vess's pages beneath it. She gave me a mirror of the past, he said softly. But Rose holds the map to the future. He stepped into the shadows of his scrying hall. Inform Vess I will consider her offer, but do not promise loyalty. He paused, then added, begin sending couriers to Rose's allies. Quietly. I want her to know that when she returns, the House of Night Whispers has not chosen a side. Another flick of his fingers, and find out what Lyra knows. The Broken Shield Tavern hadn't changed much since the occupation ended. The sign still swung on a broken chain. The ale still tasted like regret, and Kale Varnus still sat in the back corner, beneath the one lantern that never held its flame for more than an hour. But the feel of the place had shifted. Not better, just different. Less fear in the eyes of the regulars, less silence when strangers walked in, and more new faces. Faces with ambition, with whispers, with lean eyes and quick tongues that thought the city's attention had drifted. Kale saw it all. He sipped from the same chipped mug he always did, watched from the same shadowed booth. Listened. The rats were beginning to show themselves. Not the bold kind who'd served Draven directly, but the ones who'd kept their heads down, waiting for the tide to shift. The ones who would sell the future of Concordia for a chance to rewrite their own place in it. The door creaked open again. A brief shaft of daylight pierced the smoke-hazed interior before falling shut. Kale didn't need to look. He knew the pattern of that gate. Joran, one of his inside runners stationed near the House of Night Whispers. Joran didn't approach immediately. He went to the bar, took a seat, accepted a watered-down drink, waited 3 minutes, then made his way over like any man looking for a quiet corner to get away from the noise. He sat, didn't speak, just passed a small scrap of parchment under the table as he adjusted his boot. Kale took it. One glance, no expression, just a small nod. Vess sent her man to Lucienne, Joran murmured quietly, eyes forward. Late afternoon, message was sealed, standard servant route, but our girl in the Whispers got a peek. Lucienne read it. Didn't react. Kale's fingers tapped his mug once. She nervous? He asked. Not Vess. Our girl? Good, Kale said. She should be. Joran leaned in slightly. Want her to stay on post? Kale nodded. If Lucian's playing this game, I want to know who else he invites to the table. Joran shifted, but hesitated. There's more, he added quietly. Our people in the Silver Mirrors, they say Lyra and the elf girl saw the servant leave, tracked him through the rooftops. They're not subtle. Now Kale looked up, steel-grey eyes narrowing. Eli's back? Joran nodded. Arrived quietly, already snooping with Lyra. Kale leaned back slowly, taking it in. Vess was moving to cover her past. Lucienne was listening, but not committing. Rose was still gone, but her shadow hadn't left with her. And the blades were already circling. He finished his drink, set the mug down. Tell the girl in the mirrors to stay quiet. Don't warn Vess, don't slow Lyra, just watch. And the one in the Whispers? Same thing. If Lucian makes a move, any move, I want to know before the ink dries. Joran gave a small nod, then stood. Same time tomorrow. Unless the city burns before then. As the runner slipped away, Kale turned his eyes back to the tavern's crowd. New faces, old debts, shifting loyalties. He didn't trust Lucien, never had. But he understood him. And now, with Rose's return looming and the houses starting to squirm, the only question was simple. Which rat bites first? Lady Vess sat alone in her study, the glass of red wine untouched on her desk. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the velvet drapes and rune-laced furniture. A soft rain tapped against the windows, Concordia's version of a warning drum. She had received no reply from Lucien. Not a word, not a whisper. Which meant everything. She closed the ledger before her, old debts, old names, old sins, and leaned back in her chair, willing her nerves to hold steady. The city was shifting. She could feel it in the walls. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Then the door opened without waiting for a reply. Eli entered first, bracer gloves glowing faintly, silver hair pulled back in a quick, messy twist. Her grin was polite. Her eyes were not. "Knock, knock," she said sweetly. "We'd have sent a messenger, but yours are already busy." Behind her, Lyra stepped in, silent, lethal, unimpressed. Vess didn't stand. "I assume you're not here for pleasantries." Eli walked a slow circuit around the room, inspecting knickknacks with the idle interest of a cat in a birdcage shop. "Depends," she said. "Do you have anything pleasant to offer?" Vess folded her hands calmly. "I wasn't aware you were still in Concordia, Miss Eli." "And I wasn't aware you were still relevant," Eli replied without missing a beat, running a finger along the edge of a display cabinet. Lyra stayed near the desk, gaze fixed on Vess. "Interesting day," she said coolly. "Is it?" Vess asked. "I must be losing track of time." Eli turned from the shelves. "Then let me help. Your servant took a walk earlier, straight into the arms of a certain house where whispers are currency." Vess's mask didn't crack. Not a twitch. But her left hand gripped the armrest a shade too tightly. Lyra caught it. "Was that your idea?" Lyra asked, voice silk over steel. "Or desperation?" Vess's smile was faint. "If you're here to threaten me, I'd suggest a more direct approach." "Oh, this isn't a threat," Eli said, circling back toward the desk. "This is a baseline reading." She leaned casually on the desk. A slight shift of her wrist, a flicker of light, barely noticeable beneath her bracer glove, and the cloaked surveillance seed slipped from her sleeve. It landed silently beneath a stack of decorative scrolls. No one saw it fall. Eli straightened. "Besides, we're not the ones you should be afraid of." Vess tilted her head. "Then who should I be afraid of?" "Who isn't watching you right now?" Lyra replied flatly. Silence. Vess held her composure, elegant, detached. But her eyes flicked, just once, to the corner of the room, toward the mirror, not toward the scrolls, not where Eli had planted her device. "Glad we had this chat," Eli said brightly. She turned, already heading for the door. "We'll be in touch, probably when it's least convenient." Lyra followed, but paused at the threshold. "Next time, don't send someone to clean up old blood and expect no one to smell it." Then she was gone. Vess sat motionless long after the door closed. Her fingers drummed once, twice on the armrest. Then she whispered toward the mirror, voice cold and quiet. "Find it." But the one she needed to fear most had already left it behind. The windows of Rose's office were shut, the lights low, the fireplace dead cold. But the room was far from quiet. Eli sat cross-legged on the corner of Rose's desk, her bracer gloves glowing faintly as the cloaked surveillance node relayed its audio feed through a crystal amp tuned to her frequency. Across from her, Lyra leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. They had been listening for an hour. Lady Vess had been alone in her office for most of it, walking, murmuring, pacing like a predator in a cage made of her own secrets. But now the tone had shifted. Another voice had joined her, a man's voice, clean, restrained. One of her senior aides, if Lyra had to guess. "The courier hasn't returned from the whispers," the man said. "He's not supposed to," Vess replied flatly. "Lucien doesn't waste time with pleasantries." Eli raised an eyebrow. Lyra didn't move. "And if he doesn't respond at all?" the aide asked. Vess exhaled, a sound not of panic but of calculation. "Then we proceed as planned, quietly. The information in the journal cannot be allowed to dictate the city's future." Eli mouthed the words, "As planned." "Do the other houses know?" the aide asked. "Not all," Vess answered. "Only the ones with something to lose. The others will fall in line once the proposal is public." Lyra's eyes flicked up. "Proposal?" "We don't need to control the council," Vess continued. "Just enough seats to delay any restructuring until Rose's removed from the equation." Eli's head snapped toward Lyra, expression sharpening. "Removed how?" the aide asked carefully. A pause. "Not permanently," Vess said. "Just politically. Discredited, marginalized." She's a relic of Draven's war. Concordia needs a future, one led by Concordians. Another pause, then a softer voice, more dangerous. Find out who's still loyal to her and start offering them something better. The audio cut momentarily, Vess's wards flaring and distorting the signal for just a second. Eli adjusted the dial. She's trying to push Rose out before she even gets back. She's trying to sell the council on her version of Concordia, Lyra said, voice cool, before the real version walks back through the front door. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Lyra asked, "You get a lock on the aide's voice?" Eli smiled thinly. "Already marked. He's ex-military. Used to be logistics under Draven. Now he's her fixer." "Anyone else?" "Not yet, but I'll trace the rest of her council plays within the day." Lyra nodded. "Do it." She turned toward the window and stared out at the rising towers of Concordia. The city looked calm, but the power beneath its stones was churning. "She thinks she can control the future," Lyra said quietly. "She's forgotten what kind of storm is coming." Eli cracked her knuckles. "Let her forget. I like surprises." The signal faded to silence. Eli tapped the crystal amp once, muting the line. The flicker of runes on her bracer gloves dimmed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lyra exhaled through her nose. "She's moving fast." Eli slid off the desk, smoothing the front of her jacket. "Too fast. She's desperate. She's stupid." Lyra tilted her head. "Stupid people don't survive this long." Eli gave her a look. "She's not stupid enough to walk into a knife, but she's arrogant enough to believe no one's holding one." She crossed the room, boots quiet on the polished floor, and opened one of Rose's black lacquered map drawers. Inside, coded city schematics, political diagrams, movement charts of the noble houses. "Here," Eli said, pulling out a marked vellum sheet. "These are the current council swing votes, neutral or soft-leaning. If Vess is trying to secure a majority, she'll start with the lowest bidders." Lyra scanned the list. "2 of these names were in the journal." Eli nodded. "So we leak it?" Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Not the whole thing," Eli clarified. "Just enough. A page. Maybe 2. Enough to make people nervous." "Lucien won't like that." Eli's smile was razor-thin. "Lucien's already hedging. If he sees the city turning on Vess, he'll adjust his leverage." Lyra moved to the window, watching a rain cloud drift over Concordia's rooftops. "We leak it, but through a third party," she said. "Someone Vess won't trace back to us." Eli was already moving, grabbing a fresh crystal chip and slipping it into her wrist slot. "Want me to dress it up?" Lyra didn't turn. "Number, leave it messy." "Messy," Eli repeated. "She needs to think someone inside her circle panicked, that she's already bleeding." Eli clicked her tongue. "I love it when you're petty." Lyra's gaze stayed on the skyline. "This isn't petty. It's preemptive." Eli paused. "You think she's really trying to discredit Rose?" "She's laying the ground for something. You don't mobilize that fast unless you're buying time, or preparing to strike." Another silence fell. Eli just slid the prepared leak scroll into a burn sleeve and sealed it with her mark, disguised as a merchant cipher. Lyra turned from the window. "We get this into the streets. Quietly. The message is simple." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" Lyra's voice was ice. "If you stand with Lady Vess, you're standing on a sinking ship." It began with a scrap of parchment. No seal, no housemark, no official stamp. Just old ink, fresh urgency, and a hand that shook when it passed it off to a scribe in the Court of Archives. By midday, copies had made their way into the side halls of the council assembly, tucked inside ledgers and folded behind routine petitions. One found its way to the private reading room of Lord Brell of the House of Stonebridge, another to Marion, the neutral delegate from the outland territories. And by dusk, it was being whispered through silk-covered hands in the upper floors of House Silver Mirrors. A list, a map, a timeline. names of houses marked as early conspirators, long before Draven's War, before any blood had touched Concordia's gates. 5 houses, rumoured to have met in secret, coordinating efforts to shift power beneath the council's feet. 3 of those names were currently sitting on Concordia's new council. And the whispers started immediately. Lady Vess stood at the centre of her war room. Around her, aides moved quickly, burning scraps of matching parchment found circulating in the artisans' quarter. "How many copies?" she demanded. 7 confirmed, said her aide, pale-faced. Possibly more. And the language? Almost identical to the original. Vess's voice lowered to a hiss. Then someone has access. She turned, eyes burning. Seal the council wing. No guests. No pages. I want every member who received a copy accounted for now. What should we tell them? Tell them it's forged, she snapped. Tell them Draven's sympathizers are trying to undermine us. And if they don't believe it... Vess's voice was steel. Lucien unfolded a copy of the leaked parchment slowly. The candlelight cast flickering shadows across his sharp features, but his eyes were still. He traced one of the names with a gloved fingertip, a name Vess had deliberately omitted in her original message to him. Interesting. She's bleeding, he murmured. Across the room, his assistant waited. She's requested another meeting. Private. No witnesses. Lucien folded the parchment once, then again. Let her wait. And the leak? Lucien looked up, smile faint and unreadable. Let it burn just enough to warm the cold ones. I want to see who steps closer to the fire. Then we find someone to blame. Lord Brell's aide held the document at arm's length like it might catch fire. This wasn't supposed to resurface. Brell grunted. It never went away. If this is real... It is, Brell said flatly. I recognize the handwriting. One of Vess's old scribes. Thought they burned the original logs. Across the marble chamber, Marianne read her copy with a carefully composed expression. I never believed Draven's War was the only threat, she said. It wasn't, Brell muttered. It still isn't. They locked eyes. Do we go public? She asked. He shook his head. Number not yet. Let the ones with something to hide start sweating. In the glass atrium of a once proud estate, Lord Halric poured himself a heavy drink with shaking hands. His name wasn't bolded, but it was there, tied to the meetings, to the maps, to Vess. He stared out at the dark skyline. I told her to destroy it, he muttered. Behind him a shadow stirred. His spymaster. She didn't. And now someone has it. Halric downed the drink. Do we run? The shadow's voice was flat. If Rose returns and finds this, you won't have time. The informant, a bread seller, tucked the final copy into a false-bottom tray beneath the morning rolls. Gray's going to want this, she whispered to herself. Right now. Because she knew. This wasn't just a document. It was a funeral bell. The rain had stopped, but the city was still leaking. Cale Varnar sat at his usual corner table in the Broken Shield, the tavern loud with the laughter of people pretending everything was fine. He didn't bother pretending. Not tonight. Messages had come in all afternoon. Runners, whispers, sealed notes tucked inside bakery orders and temple offerings. He hadn't needed to chase a single one. They were coming to him now. Everyone was watching each other. But no one was watching him. He sipped his usual mug and sorted through the coded slips on the table before him. Most were already committed to memory, their physical forms to be destroyed later. He laid the fragments out like puzzle pieces. House of Stonebridge. Brell has broken neutrality. He knows Vess's scribe wrote the original log. House of Falling Ash. Halric is unravelling. Has inquired about exile options. House of Red Blades. Silent. Too silent. Possibly watching to see who dies first. House of Night Whispers. Lucien is holding the line. No denials, no confirmations. Playing Kingmaker. House of Silver Mirrors. Vess has locked down the estate, Questioned 3 of her own aides. 1 has vanished. Cale shook his head slowly. This, he murmured to no one, is how civil wars start. He leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together, letting the larger pattern take shape in his mind. This wasn't about a single leak anymore. This was about momentum. Vess had gambled. Lyra and Eli had pulled the thread, and now every house was looking at every other house, wondering, how much did you know, and when? A server passed by and topped off his drink. She didn't speak, just left behind a sealed envelope in exchange for a coin. Cale waited until she was gone before opening it. Inside, a sketch of the council chamber seating map with 3 circled names and a single line in coded ink beneath it. They met in secret this morning. Brell, Marianne, and Halrick's proxy. No aides, no records. Cale's jaw set. That meant one thing. The council wasn't just reacting, they were plotting. Already. He folded the note carefully and slid it into his inner coat pocket. Then he reached for his cipher journal, opened to a fresh page, and began writing, not in panic, not in haste, just precision because Rose would be back soon. And when she arrived, the first question out of her mouth would be, "What happened while I was gone?" And Cale would be the only man in Concordia who could answer, everything. Lady Vess paced the length of her private chamber, the sound of her heels sharp against the marble. The fire had burned low. No servants remained in the room. She'd dismissed them all hours ago. She no longer trusted anyone inside her walls. The leak had gutted her position faster than she could contain. It wasn't the document itself, it was the silence from her allies that told her everything. None of them had defended her. Not publicly, not in whispers, not even with silence. And now, someone had vanished. A mid-level aide with access to her inner circle. He hadn't reported for duty since yesterday. She turned sharply toward the mirror and whispered, "Activate trace grid." The glass shimmered with faint runes, showing the last known locations of her personnel. All were accounted for, except one, Thalen, a minor logistician. Quiet, obedient, always in the background, always watching. "Coward!" she spat. She crossed to her desk and unlocked a sealed drawer. From inside, she withdrew a compact silver blade, not ceremonial, not decorative, simple, sharp, and very real. If she couldn't control the narrative, she could still control the players. But as she turned toward the door, a cold breeze brushed across her neck. She paused. The fire hadn't moved. The windows were closed. The wards were holding. But someone had left a message. She turned back to the mirror. And there, written in fine white ash along the bottom edge of the glass, were 4 chilling words. "You are not unseen." Her hand trembled for just a moment before she wiped the words away. Then her jaw tightened. If they wanted a reckoning, they would have one. The door to Rose's office opened as the last of the sunlight slipped behind Concordia's western towers. Eli entered first, then stepped aside. Rose followed. She paused just inside the threshold, eyes scanning the familiar space. The dark wood desk, the map wall with her hand-pinned notations, the tall shelves of journals and artifacts. It had only been a couple days, but the room smelled different, like dust and secrets. Eli closed the door behind them. "Welcome back." Rose didn't answer right away. She moved to the desk and trailed a finger across its surface, picking up a fine trace of ash from the old fireplace. Then she looked at Eli. "What broke?" Eli arched an eyebrow. "How do you know something broke?" "Because you don't wear your hair like that unless you've been neck-deep in someone else's dirty laundry." Eli smirked. "Fair." She crossed the room and activated her crystal relay, already calibrated to the surveillance node in Vess's office. Rose raised a brow. "You tapped Vess." "Lyra found the hidden cabinet. I found the listening angle." "And the result?" Eli tapped the relay once. A whisper of Vess's voice crackled to life. "Just enough seats to delay any restructuring until Rose is removed from the equation." Rose didn't blink. She stepped back from the relay and turned to the window, watching as night began to descend. "She's trying to rewrite Concordia," Eli said softly. "Without you." "No," Rose murmured. "She's trying to rewrite herself. I just happen to be in the way." Silence stretched between them. Then Rose turned. Her voice was calm, measured. "Tomorrow we remind her whose name is carved into the foundation of this city." Eli just grinned. "I've already laid the groundwork." The door creaked open again. Rose didn't turn. Cale Varnor stepped inside without ceremony, shaking off the last mist of street rain from his coat. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes swept over Eli, then Lyra, who was now leaning in the far corner, arms crossed, silent as ever. "I'd bet good coin the two of you are responsible for this mess," he said gruffly. Eli gave a theatrical shrug. "Define mess." Lyra didn't speak, just tilted her head slightly, predator sharp. Cale ignored them both and crossed to the desk where Rose had already pulled out the chair opposite her. He sat down with the weight of someone carrying 2 cities' worth of fallout in his shoulders. "You have issues?" he said flatly. Rose raised a brow. "Just the one?" "You have a civil war about to break out. Half the council's rattling swords under the table, the other half's waiting to see which way the blood spills." He placed a sealed folder on her desk. Rose opened it. Her eyes scanned the first few pages. Council voting behaviour, house alliances shifting like sand, names she'd trusted now circled in red. When she looked up, Cale was watching her closely. "I told you they'd wait until the moment you were out of sight," he said. "But this? They started rewriting the ending before you left the chapter." Rose closed the folder. "Is Vess behind the leak?" "No," Cale said. "But she's the reason it matters." Lyra finally spoke. She thought she could keep the journal buried. "And the second it surfaced," Eli added, "everyone started counting which secrets might resurface next." Cale gave her a curt nod. "Exactly." He leaned forward slightly, eyes hard. "If you don't act soon, the city's going to tear itself apart before anyone else gets the chance." Rose didn't answer. She stood instead, moved to the window again. Concordia shimmered beyond the glass, peaceful at first glance. But underneath, it was breathing faster than usual, nervous. She let the silence stretch. Then, quietly, said, "Then let's remind them why this city survived the First War." Lady Vess stared into her hearth, watching the flames burn lower than they should. Even fire, it seemed, had grown timid. The ward stones embedded in the corners of her study pulsed gently, still intact, still hers. But that meant little now. Wards couldn't shield her from silence. Not a single council member had responded to her summons. Not one. Even Halric, the most self-serving among them, had gone quiet. She'd sent him 3 messages today. The last came back unopened, carried by a courier who wouldn't meet her eyes. Vess stood and poured herself a measure of dark wine. She drank it in one swallow, not for taste, but for the burn. It grounded her, reminded her she was still here, still standing, still dangerous. A knock came at the door. She froze. 1 knock, pause, 2 short taps. Internal security code. She stepped to the door, slid the latch, and opened it just enough to admit a tall, pale man in a cloak too fine for a servant. Thalen. He stepped inside like a shadow returning home. Vess closed the door behind him. "You vanished," she said coldly. "I was collecting," Thalen replied, removing a folded bundle from beneath his cloak. This arrived in the hands of one of Lucien's aides. I intercepted a copy before it could reach the Senate wing. He placed the parchment on her desk. Vess unfolded it, shaking fingers betraying the calm she fought to wear. It was one of the leaked pages. A duplicate. A ghost. Her ghost. Her handwriting. The ink from a decade ago. "I told you this was destroyed." Thalen didn't answer, because he hadn't destroyed it. She knew now. "You kept a copy," she said softly. He didn't deny it. It was leverage. "You think I wouldn't find out?" "I think you're finding out too late." Vess drew the small silver blade from her side belt, and stepped forward. Not fast, not dramatic. Just final. Thalan didn't move. "You'll kill me now?" he asked. "When the whole city already knows?" "No," she whispered, "but I might enjoy it." Before she could decide if she meant it, another knock broke the room. Sharp, loud, uncoded, uninvited. Both of them turned toward the door. Vess narrowed her eyes, lowered the blade. "Get rid of whoever it is," she told Thalen. He didn't move. Instead, he said something she didn't expect. "They're not here for me." She stared at him. He gave her the faintest smile. "They're here for you." The knock came again. Harder this time. Lady Vess kept her blade lowered but didn't sheath it. She gave Thalen a sharp nod. He opened the door. 3 figures stood outside. 2 wore the dark grey uniforms of the Council Guard. Not her personal security, not military, but the impartial enforcers of Council law. Between them stood Councillor Marianne. Her elegant outer cloak was soaked from the rain, but her composure was perfect. Neutral. Diplomatic. Dangerous in a way Vess had once underestimated. "Councillor," Vess said tightly, stepping forward, "to what do I owe this performance?" Marianne didn't smile. "The council has convened an emergency session." "I wasn't informed," Vess said. "No," Marianne agreed. "You weren't." She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a parchment scroll bound with red thread. Vess didn't need to see the seal to know what it was. A formal notice of investigation. "Lady Vess of the House of Silver Mirrors," Marianne said clearly, "you are summoned to appear before the Concordian Council at dawn to answer charges of sedition, obstruction, and deliberate falsification of historical records." Behind her the guards remained stone still. Vess stared at the parchment, then slowly met Marianne's eyes. "And if I refuse?" Marianne tilted her head. "Then the House of Silver Mirrors will be placed under provisional suspension, all members and holdings seized, and your absence interpreted as admission." Thalan said nothing. Vess took the scroll. Her hand didn't shake and her voice didn't crack. "I'll be there." Marianne gave a short nod and turned, the guard stepping aside as she vanished back into the mist. The door clicked shut. Vess stared at the fire for a long moment before she finally turned to Thalan. Her voice was quiet. "Find me a way out of this." The office was quiet again. Eli had gone to recalibrate her relay crystal. Lyra stood near the far window, silent as a blade waiting to be drawn. Cale remained seated across from Rose, arms folded, eyes sharp. He didn't speak until the click of the wardstones told him they were alone. Then he leaned forward and placed another slip of parchment on the desk. Rose didn't touch it. "Marianne?" she asked. Cale nodded. "Just left the Silver Mirrors." "She deliver it herself?" "Of course," Cale said. "It had to be personal." Rose finally picked up the parchment. No seal, just a name. 3 charges: sedition, obstruction, falsification. Rose let out a slow breath. "So, the council found its teeth?" "No," Cale said. "The council found a scapegoat." He tapped the parchment. "These charges, they're real. But the timing, the delivery, that's orchestration. Marianne, Brell, and 2 others met this morning. No record, no aids. This isn't about justice. It's about optics." Rose studied him. "They're not trying to hold Vess accountable. They're trying to distance themselves." "Exactly," Cale said. "They see what's coming. They know what's buried in the journal. And they know your return changes the calculus." Lyra stepped forward from the shadows. "They're burning the weakest link to protect the rest." Rose turned to Cale. "Do they expect her to break?" "They're hoping she runs," Cale said. "If she flees, she takes the fall alone. If she shows up and drags the other names down with her, the council fractures. Again." "She's cornered," Rose murmured. "Which makes her unpredictable," Lyra said. "Which makes her dangerous," Cale corrected. He leaned back, eyes steady. "This is the last night we have to control the story." Rose stared at the charges again. "If I show up at the hearing..." "They'll turn it into theatre," Cale said. They'll try to paint you as the reason Concordia can't move forward. And if I don't, then they'll think you're scared. Rose was quiet for a long moment, then she rose, the parchment still in her hand. I'm not afraid of their lies, she said softly. Cale stood too, number. But they're afraid of your truth. Across the room, Lyra gave a single nod. So, Eli said, stepping back in with a flicker of rune light across her fingers. Are we burning it all down at sunrise or playing nice? Rose looked out the window, where the first lanterns were being lit across Concordia, and she smiled. Let's start with a reminder. Then we'll see who's still standing. The House of Silver Mirrors had rarely been this quiet. Servants moved like ghosts. No one made eye contact, the kind of stillness that settled before a funeral. Or a purge. Lady Vess stood at the long mirror in her private chambers, adjusting the drape of her outer cloak for the 5th time. There was no vanity in the gesture, only calculation. If she was to be judged in the morning, she would be judged looking untouchable. A soft chime echoed. She froze. Not the ward alarm. Not a servant bell. The entry wards had accepted someone with override clearance. She turned just as the doors opened, and Rose stepped through. No guard, no herald, just her, a shadow in black. Flame barely leashed behind her eyes. Behind her, Lyra followed, silent and still as a hanging blade. Vess's voice came calm but too quickly. I expected you'd go straight to the council. I expected you wouldn't waste your last moves on a courier, Rose replied. Silence. Rose didn't sit. She didn't take off her coat. She simply walked the perimeter of the room, fingers trailing lightly along polished surfaces, ancient inlaid wood, silver-framed ledgers. I read your journal, she said. Vess stayed still. Then you understand why I buried it. Rose turned her head slightly. You didn't bury it. You hid behind it. Vess's voice cracked just for a moment. You weren't here. And you weren't supposed to survive, Rose said. Yet here we are. She turned fully to face her now. You sent a message to Lucienne. Vess's mask held barely. I needed allies. You needed insulation, Rose corrected. Someone else to bleed if this went bad. Another beat of silence. Then Rose asked, genuine, sharp. Tell me, Vess, do you believe Concordia is better off without me? The words hung in the room like a guillotine. Vess looked at her, really looked, and for the first time the facade cracked fully. No, she said softly, but I believed it might survive me better than it would survive you. Lyra shifted. Rose held up a hand without turning. Not yet. She stepped closer. One more question. Vess swallowed. Yes? If I walk out of here and leave you standing, are you going to stab me in the back again? Vess didn't speak. She just looked tired, worn, afraid, and ashamed. Finally, I don't know. Rose nodded once, then turned away. At the door, she stopped. To survive what's coming, we don't need loyalty. She looked back over her shoulder. We need clarity. Then she stepped into the hall. Lyra lingered, just for a moment. Then she said without warmth, if Rose doesn't cut you loose, I will. And then she was gone, leaving Lady Vess alone. Again, and unsure if she'd just been spared or sentenced. The House of Night Whispers didn't sleep, but it pretended to. The grand obsidian facade, veined with flickering starlight enchantments, loomed quiet over the western quarter. Its gate was closed, its lanterns dimmed. From the outside, it appeared at rest, contemplative, still. But Rose knew better. She didn't knock. She stood in front of the sealed door for exactly 3 seconds before the runes began to react. One pulsed once, then twice. The door opened. No greeting, no escort, just darkness and a corridor of velvet silence. She stepped inside. The temperature dropped behind her. Sound vanished. The very walls seemed to breathe, pulling her presence deeper with each step. Then a voice, smooth as aged ink. I was under the impression even you knew how to read a clock, Rose. Lucienne stood at the top of the staircase, wrapped in a midnight robe, hair still too perfect for someone supposedly pulled from sleep. He looked down at her like a man more intrigued than angry. Rose stopped at the foot of the stairs, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes unreadable. Good to see you too, Lucienne. He descended slowly, barefoot but poised, and when he reached the bottom step, he gestured toward the inner study without a word. They entered the parlour of secrets, a wide chamber draped in silk, with low tables and mirrored lanterns, casting illusions across the walls. A single decanter sat untouched beside two crystal glasses. Lucien poured himself a glass of pale wine, then another for her. He didn't hand it to her. He set it down on the table between them and took his seat. Rose remained standing. I know about the leak, she said. Lucien sipped his wine. Of course you do. Half the city's tripping over it. I know who planted it. Lucien gave the faintest smile. Do you? I also know who sat on the original records, Rose continued, and who decided to let Vess twist in the wind before I got back. Lucien didn't answer immediately. Then he said lightly, and yet, you're not kicking my door in. Rose stepped forward, boots quiet on the velvet floor. I don't kick down doors I might need again. Lucien looked up at her, his gaze suddenly sharper. You think I owe you something? I think you know where this city goes if we let it split down the middle again. Silence. Then Lucien stood, set down his wine, moved closer. You came for a favour? No, Rose said. I came for the truth. She looked him dead in the eye. When the council starts shifting blame, I need to know who's buying their own safety and what they're offering in return. Lucien's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes flickered. And if I tell you, he asked, what do I get? You get to live in a Concordia that isn't torn apart by the same hands rebuilding it. Lucien tilted his head, considering. Then he moved to a high drawer behind the hearth and retrieved a folded sheaf of thin black paper, marked with sigils known only to those who paid in silence. He passed it to her without ceremony. 4 council members, deals made since the leak. 2 to sacrifice vessels. 1 trying to blame it all on journal forgery, and 1 who's still waiting to see where you fall. Rose took the paper, didn't thank him, didn't smile. Just said, wise of them. Then she turned for the door. Lucien's voice followed her. Was it worth the walk? Rose paused just before stepping out. I'll let you know tomorrow, when the knives come out. And then she was gone. The door shut behind her like the closing of a vault. Lucien stood in silence for a long time, then whispered, one day, you'll ask for more than truth. The first light of dawn broke across Concordia's rooftops like a blade drawn from velvet. Inside the high chamber of Rose's war room, the team was already in motion. Eli worked at the crystal table, layering the last of the journal's projections into clean schematics. Names, motives, tether points, every secret they could use, distilled and ready. Lyra stood at the weapons rack, strapping on her concealed knives like they were just another set of gloves. Across the room, Rose stood at the tall windows, silent, watching as the golden haze of morning poured over the skyline. The city was waking up, and it was going to see her. A soft knock, 3 slow taps. Nothing more. The door opened. Cale stepped in. No escort, no sound, just a faint trace of cold air from the street behind him. He looked tired, as always. Rain clung to the edges of his coat, but his eyes were clear. You're visible, he said simply. Rose turned. They know. Cale nodded. Confirmed late last night. Marianne received word you were seen outside the Whispers. Someone watching the gates recognized you. Lyra gave a half smile. Lucien's people always notice what he doesn't say. Cale walked to the table and set down a folded report, one of his discreet communiques, simple but sharp. Eli picked it up and scanned it. Her eyes widened. They moved the council's meeting time up. No formal notice. Cale nodded. They're rattled. They want this over before the city finishes its morning tea. Afraid of a spectacle, Lyra said. No, Cale corrected. Afraid of losing control of it. Rose looked from him to the map. Are they united? No, Cale replied. They're fractured. Marianne and Brel are still trying to contain the fallout by blaming Vess. But 3 others are stalling, waiting to see what you do. He paused. If you come in strong, they might break toward you. Rose said nothing, just turned back to the window, letting the sunlight cut across her features. Then finally, then I'll give them something to break toward. Eli closed the report. You want the full package? The journal, the leak, the name at the center? Rose shook her head. Not yet. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because I'm not walking into a tribunal, Rose said. I'm walking into a table full of cowards. She stepped away from the glass and picked up her coat. I want them to feel safe enough to speak first. She fastened the clasp at her collar, smoothed it once. Then I'll remind them why silence was the better option. Cale gave the barest nod. I'll be watching from the chamber floor, back corner. No one will see me. They never do, Rose said without turning. When they arrived at the gates of the House of Silver Mirrors, they didn't request entry. They walked through it. The doors parted under old enchantments and newer fear. Rose moved with practiced calm through the polished halls, servants scattering without command. At the foot of the grand staircase, Lady Vess stood waiting. Already dressed, already guarded, already trying to look composed. Rose didn't stop walking until she was close enough for Vess to feel her breath. The weight of silence between them settled like a guillotine. I assume this is a courtesy visit, Vess said tightly. Rose didn't blink. Number this is retrieval. I can walk myself. You can walk with me, or you can be dragged behind me like the last piece of old regime furniture Concordia hasn't thrown out yet. Vess's jaw clenched. You don't command the council. No, Rose said coolly, but I command the room. A muscle twitched in Vess's temple, but before she could reply, her security aide, tall, armoured, and clearly mistaking the atmosphere for opportunity, stepped forward. You'll watch your tone in this house? Before the last syllable left his mouth, Lyra was there. One step, one blur. She planted herself between him and Rose like a drawn dagger. Expression empty, eyes promising pain. Touch her, Lyra said quietly, and you'll be eating through a straw for the next 4 councils. The man didn't move, didn't breathe, smart. Eli, not missing a beat, leaned to the side and stage whispered, You know, for a palace guard, that was adorable. The man twitched. Vess hissed, Control your wolves. Rose didn't look away from her. Oh, I do, she said. Then she turned slightly and gave Eli a look. You've been hanging around Darren too much. Eli grinned. I'm learning from the best. Vess stared for a long moment, trapped between losing face and losing ground. In the end, she chose to walk. Not beside Rose, not behind her. Just far enough to make it clear she wasn't leading. And that made all the difference. The vaulted hallway outside the council chamber stretched ahead like a quiet blade. Torches flickered in silver sconces. Voices murmured behind the great doors, too faint to make out, but sharp with anticipation. They were being watched. Rose knew it. Not by guards, not by nobles, but by everyone who mattered. She stopped halfway to the doors and turned sharply to Lady Vess. Vess, already tense, blinked as Rose stepped close once again. Her voice dropped low, measured and cold. You don't speak unless I tell you to. Vess opened her mouth. Too fast. Rose cut her off with a look so precise it could have been a scalpel. No speeches, no apologies, no strategic flailing. You breathe when I say so. You sit when I sit. And if anyone asks you a question, I wait for you. Vess said quietly. Rose nodded once. Good. I'd hate to have Lyra interrupt again. Lyra didn't smile. She just stared at Vess in profile, like she was mentally estimating wind speed and pressure. Eli stepped in beside them, flipping a slender coin between her fingers. A harmless spell token, though her smirk was anything but harmless. She going to follow orders? Eli asked dryly. Or are we flipping her upside down before breakfast? Rose didn't answer. Instead, she straightened her coat, smoothed the lapel, and turned toward the doors. It's time. The guards on either side of the chamber gave a subtle nod, enchanted hinges unlocking in a smooth click. The great doors began to open. And, for the first time in years, Rose stepped into the council chamber. The doors of the council chamber opened with a whisper that silenced everything. 12 councillors sat in an arc of polished obsidian. Some leaned forward, others stayed frozen. Murmurs died in throats, postures stiffened, and then Rose entered. Not hurried, not regal, just inevitable. Her boots tapped lightly against the black stone floor as she moved toward the centre of the chamber. No announcement. No escort, just presence. Behind her came Eli, calm and sharp, adjusting the crystal relay under her arm like she was tuning an instrument of war. And Lyra, blade quiet and watchful, eyes tracking the room like a predator in no mood to chase. Trailing them, tense, hesitant, Lady Vess, her head held high but her movements clipped. They were not walking into a room of peers, they were walking into a room already afraid of what it had summoned. One man stood. Councillor Thorne. He rose with absolute clarity, his right hand flat to his chest. Not out of honour, but memory. And as his face turned to greet Rose, the brand on his cheek came into full view. A scorched rose blossom etched deep into the flesh just beneath his eye, still red at the edges, still raw enough to sting in cold weather. It was the mark of a man who had once betrayed her, or hesitated when he shouldn't have. And it was the mark of a man who would never do it again. The other councillors didn't rise, not immediately. Some glanced at Thorne, some looked away. All of them saw the brand, and they remembered. Rose said nothing at first. She moved to the centre of the stone floor and stopped. Her coat shifted as she turned. Her eyes scanned the room like a tactician taking inventory. Then her voice rang out, clear and razor-sharp. I see you've all had a productive week. A few councillors stirred. Backroom meetings, leaked records, emergency sessions, carefully curated silence. She gestured toward the space behind her. Eli stepped forward and placed a journal, silver-bound, rune-sealed, onto the centre table. This is what you were all afraid of. The truth. She stepped forward once. But let me be clear. The truth didn't crawl out of the dark to ruin you. It's been here the entire time. You just hoped I wouldn't bring it to light. Her gaze landed on Councillor Brell, who flinched, then on Marianne, who stared back with careful neutrality. And then, finally, on Thorne. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. The brand said everything. Rose turned back to the chamber. I've come not to answer your accusations. I've come to remind you that Concordia was rebuilt on fire, not votes. That it was held, not by your titles, but by the people who walked through blood to keep this city standing. She glanced at Lady Vess, then back to the council. You want to hang her? Do it. But don't lie to yourselves about what she is. Because if she goes down, you go with her. The records know. I know. She let the silence stretch, let the fear soak. Then, so go ahead. Call this a hearing. She stepped back, arms at her sides. But remember, every word spoken today will be remembered tomorrow. And if any of you think this is your moment to rise, ask Thorne how well that worked out. A beat of silence followed Rose's words. Then from the upper arc of the chamber, Councillor Marianne rose. She did not rush. She did not posture. Her movements were exact, composed, rehearsed not in vanity, but in intent. Marianne was Concordian nobility to the bone, crystalline diction, cold grace, and eyes that saw 10 moves ahead. "Your arrival, Lady Rose," she said smoothly, "is noted." Her voice echoed without amplification, commanding without force. "And while your perspective is, as always, compelling, this chamber has not convened to revisit your memories of the war, nor your disciplinary history with Councillor Thorne." A murmur rippled through the benches, cautious but real. Thorne didn't blink. He remained standing, chin lifted, the burn on his cheek a silent counterpoint. Marianne continued, "We are here to assess the security of Concordia's future, the integrity of its leadership, and whether or not certain figures, regardless of their legacy, have become too unpredictable to serve that future." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. All eyes shifted to Rose again. Even Vess turned slightly, uncertain now whether she was still the target or the bait. Eli leaned in slightly behind Rose. "Subtle. She's pushing you toward a forced vote." Lyra's hand brushed the hilt of a blade beneath her coat. "Let her. She won't like the answer." But Rose didn't move. She let Marianne's words hang, let the threat bloom in full. Then she stepped forward again, just one pace, and said, "Let's talk about unpredictability then." She motioned to Eli. Eli didn't hesitate. She reached into her coat and pulled a folded slip of parchment, the one taken from Lucien's archive at 1 a.m. Rose took it, unfolded it slowly, and held it aloft. "Last night, 4 of you signed covert agreements to vote for Vess's removal before this session began." Gasps. One councillor stood halfway before sinking again. "2 of you prepared offers for her assets, trade routes, land rights, influence blocks, assuming she wouldn't survive the hour. And 1 of you," her gaze slid to the far end of the table, "offered a motion to delay all rebuilding efforts pending a review of Lady Vess's role in Concordia's future." She lowered the parchment. "Now, tell me again about unpredictability." Marianne's face didn't change, but her knuckles curled just slightly against the edge of the bench. Rose turned slightly to address the whole chamber now. "You're not here to protect Concordia. You're here to survive it." And then sharply to Marianne, "You want a future? Stand still long enough to be counted in it." Rose scoffed, quietly but with enough force to cut straight through Marianne's polished tone. She stepped forward again, her voice low and razor clean. Security, integrity, unpredictability. She rolled the words on her tongue like something sour. "Let's talk about what really threatened Concordia." The room stilled. Not the war, not Draven, not even the Black Dawn. She paced slowly, each step deliberate as her gaze swept the semicircle of seated councillors. "It was you, some of you, sitting right here." A ripple of discomfort shifted through the chamber. "Before Draven ever broke the gates, before the first crystal bled into this city, you were already plotting." She let her words hang there, heavy. Secret meetings, shadow alliances, power plays carved from greed and fear. Several councillors sat back as if her words were heat. One looked away. Another's hand went unconsciously to their collar. She didn't look at any one person for too long, but she didn't have to. You wanted control. You wanted Concordia for yourselves. And when the real threat arrived, you collapsed under the weight of your own ambition. Silence swallowed the room. She reached into her coat and held up a second set of pages. Not the journal, but copies. Deliberate. Clean. "I have names." She looked at each member now, carefully, pausing long enough for the pressure to bite, short enough to avoid open accusation. "I have minutes from meetings, sealed correspondences, land transfers that were never filed, every signature, every whisper." A long intake of breath from somewhere in the room. Rose turned toward Marianne, who now stared not with superiority, but a quiet, strategic dread. "Shall I display them now?" she asked, voice sweet as poison. "In front of the full chamber?" with press and citizen witnesses looking on. Perhaps they'd enjoy knowing who was selling Concordia long before anyone came to conquer it. A cough, a shuffle, a bead of sweat. Even the council guards shifted on their feet. Rose folded the papers with care and placed them back inside her coat. No? She let the word echo. Then let's be done pretending this is about law or order or progress. Her voice cooled to ice. This is about fear and leverage. And which one of you is going to blink first? And then just slightly, she smiled. The room had gone quiet again. But this time, it wasn't respect or formality. It was fear. Rose stood at the centre of the chamber, eyes sweeping the arc of pale faces and shifting bodies. Then she spoke, not loud, but the silence made every word thunder. The individuals involved in that transgression, she said, have until 5 p.m. today to resign their positions and vacate their posts of influence. She let the weight of that deadline settle. You are no longer useful. A cough, a muffled intake of breath. One councillor went pale. If you try to stay, Rose continued, voice sharpening just slightly, then the names, the records, and the evidence will be released, publicly, for all to see. She said nothing more, didn't elaborate, didn't name a soul, because she didn't have to. Then, with absolute calm, she turned. Eli followed first, shoulders relaxed, smirking as if she were leaving a dinner party. Lyra followed next, silent, watchful, one hand resting just above her belt. Lady Vess for once said nothing at all, and Councillor Thorne stood again as Rose passed, head bowed slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. As the doors swung shut behind her, the chamber exhaled, and for the first time in years the council felt what it was like to be ruled again.